My castaway this week is the actor Richard E. Grant.
I decided to emigrate with literally, like Dick Whittington, with 2 suitcases and a box of cassettes and a Walkman, and came to London, rented a bedsit in Notting Hill Gate. It was £30 a week, and then worked as a waiter at a brasserie in Covent Garden, which is still there, till I started getting acting work. So I didn't really have any contacts whatsoever, but just came over with blind ambition. Richard E. Grant is My Castaway on Desert Island Discs, tomorrow morning at 9.
Back to this evening, the 6 o'clock news is next. Then Alexei Sales delivers another half hour of comedy direct from his sandwich emporium. Tonight he looks at the importance of repetition in our culture. Alexei Sales' imaginary sandwich bar opens at 6:30. Has Neil found a new protege? The Archers reveals all tonight at 7. And the latest series of The Crown has been the most talked about yet, from its portrayal of Princess Diana to discussions over historical inaccuracies. But is it any good? Front Row finds out. We'll join Tom Sutcliffe from just after 7:15.
BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Vigialis. Good evening. Ukraine's top general has said his troops' devastating attacks on Russian supply lines and command systems left the invaders with no option but to abandon Kherson, a city Vladimir Putin had declared would be Russian forever. The senior barrister for the inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire has savaged the companies and organizations involved, speaking of cynical and possibly dishonest practices. More strikes are on their way. 100,000 civil servants will walk out over pay and conditions, as will teachers in Scotland. Another train driver strike has also been announced. There is more bad news for people on waiting lists for operations and treatment at hospitals in England. And there's been some cricket.
5 needed. Shami's on his way. Is there any bowls to Butler? It goes for the straight hit for 6. The fielder underneath it. Can't take it.
The last of 10 spanking sixers as England steamroller India to book a place in the T20 World Cup final. The head of Ukraine's armed forces has said Russian troops were left with no other option but to flee the southern city of Kherson after his soldiers destroyed supply lines and severely disrupted the command and control system. General Valery Zaluzhny said his forces had advanced 5 miles in the past 24 hours, liberating 12 settlements, with particular successes in the Mykolaiv area. When Russia annexed the region in September, President Putin said Kherson would be Russian forever. Our correspondent James Waterhouse sent this report from Kiev.
The sound of liberation in the village of Snihirivka. Ukrainian soldiers chant while being thanked by a crowd of people. It's in the southern Mykolaiv region, which Kiev claims is now almost completely back in Ukrainian control. These are signs of military movement after Moscow declared it was pulling out of the nearby city of Kherson. In fact, Russia's defense ministry is calling it a maneuver. It would be a humiliating retreat if it indeed happens. While there are signs of a Ukrainian advance, it's less clear if, when or how Russian troops will pull back across the Dnipro River.
I think they are leaving Kherson. It's not a trap, it's not a game.
Oleksiy Goncharenko is a Ukrainian MP.
Their options were very limited. Or to leave Kherson now, or to try to fight for Kherson. But in any way, this battle would be lost for Russians, because without supply, they couldn't survive.
Ukraine has put recent advances down to the successful targeting of Russian supply lines, as well as to disrupting their chains of command. What isn't clear is what they might find in Kherson. A senior government official claims it's being turned into a city of death by the Russians mining everything they can to disrupt the people taking over the city. In this war, liberation has often proved to be bittersweet for those at the heart of it.
President Putin has yet to say anything about the retreat, preferring to leave the military to explain the decision. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has been monitoring reaction in Moscow.
The withdrawal from Kherson is a blow to what Vladimir Putin calls his special operation. So how has the Kremlin been explaining this retreat to the Russian people?
Это очень тяжелое решение.
On state TV, a presenter called it a difficult but brave decision. He urged viewers to stay calm, trust the generals, and, seemingly encouraging the search for scapegoats abroad, repeated several times, NATO is fighting Russia. In their reporting of the story, Russian newspapers were full of photos of Defense Minister Shoigu and Russian General Surovikin, a sign that the Kremlin wants the army to own this decision and is keen to try to distance the president from it. Meanwhile, on the streets of Moscow, opinion was divided. Viewing the loss of Kherson as a temporary setback, Alexander told me, victory will definitely be ours. Of course it will. When have the Russians ever lost? But Christina wants Russian troops to leave the whole of Ukraine straight away.
I really hope that Russian soldiers will come back and Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin will leave his post and Ukraine and Russia will be free from this dictator.
As for the president, Russia's commander-in-chief, Vladimir Putin has yet to comment publicly on the withdrawal. Barely 6 weeks ago, the Kremlin had declared that Kherson would be part of Russia forever. But forever didn't last long.
The public inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire has finished, with its senior barrister delivering a strongly worded attack on the companies and organizations involved in the maintenance of the tower block in West London. 72 people died in the disaster in 2017. Richard Millett KC said there had been incompetence as well as cynical and possibly dishonest practices in the building industry and a failure of the government to prevent the fire. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons was at the final hearing.
For 2 years and 10 months, the inquiry's been scrutinising the materials manufacturers, consultants, contractors and architects involved in the disastrous refurbishment of Grenfell Tower, during which highly flammable cladding was added to the outside. Richard Millett KC warned that at the start there were signs these core participants would seek to point the finger at each other. In this last day of hearings, Mr. Millett produced a tangled diagram of arrows and names, a web of blame, to illustrate how each of the core participants who've given evidence at the inquiry have attempted to avoid being found responsible.
I told you that all the indications were to be that some, at least, of the core participants would indulge in what I termed a merry-go-round of butt-passing. But for many, even now, on day 312 of this phase of this inquiry, the merry-go-round turns still, the notes of its melody clearly audible in the last few days.
He said companies were using complex arguments to avoid future legal liability, adding a public inquiry is not the place for cleverness, but for candour. He offered 2 early conclusions: that all of those involved should have known about the risks of a serious fire, and that the deaths of 72 people were avoidable. This week, manufacturers of building materials used in the refurbishment claimed in final submissions that designers and architects should have been responsible for ensuring these products were used safely. The Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea said the government had been made aware more than a decade before the fire, in tests first revealed by the BBC, that the cladding posed a fire risk. The inquiry chair, Sir Martin Moore-Bick, will report towards the end of next year. The conclusion of the police investigation will follow around 6 months after publication, and after that, possible criminal charges.
Bristol Council has confirmed that a different type of flammable cladding contributed to the spread of a fire at one of its tower blocks last month. Concerns about the material, known as expanded polystyrene cladding, has prompted it to introduce round-the-clock patrols at 38 tower blocks fitted with the same product. It's not known whether the same cladding has been used by other local authorities. Bristol Council's Cabinet Member for Housing, Tom Renard, says the problem is so widespread in the city that it could take a decade to solve.
One of the real challenges with getting all of the blocks remediated and refurbished is the availability of the market. So both in terms of scaffolding to go up the blocks and also the labour and materials to carry out the work. So we couldn't scaffold 38 tower blocks tomorrow, for example, because the resources wouldn't be available locally to do that.
The latest figures from NHS England show a record number of patients had to wait at least 4 hours to be seen in A&E departments last month. The figure was just under 600,000, up from 500,000 last October. The operational standard states that at least 95% of patients should be admitted, transferred or discharged within 4 hours. Here's our health reporter, Jim Reid.
Conditions in English hospitals were described by the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, which represents thousands of doctors and nurses, as dire and dangerous. Almost 1 in 3 patients who turned up as A&E, some 600,000 people, had to wait more than 4 hours before they could be treated in October. That is up sharply on the previous month and the worst performance on record. Almost 50,000 of the sickest patients who needed to be transferred to a ward were stuck in A&E for more than 12 hours until a free bed could be found. That again is the highest number ever recorded in England. A&E units in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have been under similar pressure. At the same time, the waiting list for routine treatments such as hip replacements or cataract surgery has continued to climb to 7.1 million, or 1 in 8 of the entire population of England. The NHS said A&E units saw their busiest October ever. Doctors are also finding it hard to quickly discharge many recovering patients back into the community because social care support isn't available.
Health charities have described the sharp rise in the number of people waiting for cancer treatment across England, Scotland and Northern Ireland as unacceptable. The BBC has analysed NHS data which shows the figure has doubled in the past 4 years to 69,000. NHS officials have said staff would not stop in their efforts to catch cancers earlier and save more lives. Here's our health correspondent, Dominic Hughes.
Waiting for a cancer diagnosis and then for treatment to begin can be an anxious, uncertain time. When Charlotte Park was told she had an aggressive form of breast cancer, she expected her treatment to start quickly. Instead, she waited months in frustration and worry.
As much as I was phoning, I couldn't get seen any quicker than what they could give me an appointment. I mean, they are under a massive amount of stress. I totally understand that. If I hadn't been persistent, I don't know what had happened. It doesn't bear thinking about, really.
BBC research shows Charlotte's experience is one faced by thousands of people. The target is for patients to start treatment within 62 days after an urgent GP referral. But an analysis of data from England, Scotland and Northern Ireland shows the number of people who wait longer than 62 days has doubled when compared with 4 years ago. Long waits also appear to be on the rise in Wales, but comparable data isn't available. Part of the problem is a huge backlog that built up during the pandemic, but cancer services, like many parts of the NHS, are also struggling to recruit new staff and retain those who are already working. In an effort to bring down waiting times, 90 new diagnostic hubs have been set up in England to speed up the process.
Okay, sir, the injection is about to start.
At Lewisham Hospital in South London, new scanners allow more patients to be seen, as consultant radiologist Dr. Fatima Shah explains.
The scanners are providing the trust with increased capacity, so we can scan more patients. They are also providing us with much better image quality and reduced scan times. So we're able to scan an extra 20 patients a week with our new MRI scanner that we weren't able to do before.
NHS leaders say cancer services are busier than ever. More diagnostic tests are being carried out and more patients are being identified at an earlier stage. But the latest data shows there are still bottlenecks in the system, and patients are having to wait for treatment they know could save their lives.
A BBC investigation has found that farmers are hiring private security firms to protect their land and property because they have lost confidence in the police. An analysis of official data shows suspects in urban areas are nearly 25% more likely to be charged with an offence than in rural locations. The Home Office said the police had plans to deal with what they call the particular challenges of rural crime. Our correspondent, Ed Thomas, has been speaking to a farmer near Ely in Cambridgeshire.
We're always being tested, definitely, 100%.
We're on patrol with Luke Palmer, who has more than 4,000 acres to protect. He says over the past year he's suffered at least 30 crimes.
We've had generators stolen, we've had batteries stolen off machines. Don't go near them.
Cambridgeshire Police told us there's only been one crime report from Luke and his farm over the past year. Luke disputes this. Our investigation found that significantly fewer crimes are being solved in rural areas in England and Wales than in cities and towns. In 2021, the proportion of crimes where a suspect was charged was 24% higher in urban areas than in the countryside. Evie Hunter's farm in Hertfordshire was recently part of a crime wave targeting machinery. She had £60,000 worth of sat-nav equipment stolen. There were 30 other similar crimes on the same night. She fears organised crime gangs are targeting farms.
I'll go and drive the tractors at night and I'll be there in the dark on my own, and if, you know, I don't want to be faced with these people. It's scary, actually. All we're trying to do is feed the nation.
The Home Office told us that it recognised there were challenges in responding to rural crime, and there was a strategy in place to tackle the issue.
Police have made further arrests on the M25 around London as campaigners from the group Just Stop Oil caused road closures and traffic jams for the fourth day in a row. Officers had to remove people who had climbed onto gantries across the motorway in Surrey and Essex. The protesters say they are unhappy about the government issuing new licenses to allow further exploration of oil and gas in the North Sea. You're listening to the 6 o'clock news on BBC Radio 4. The main news so far: Ukraine's top general has said Russian invaders had no option but to abandon the city of Kherson because his troops had wrought such havoc on the invaders' supply and command lines. The public inquiry hearings into the Grenfell Tower fire have wrapped up, with its senior barrister speaking of cynical and possibly dishonest practices. Still to come.
This was one of the more controversial items on the agenda. Many clerics apparently relish the call of the open road.
The church authorities in Germany warn their clergy to beware the highway to hell. Cricket and England are through to the final of the T20 World Cup after a 10-wicket demolition of India at the Adelaide Oval. England reached their target of 169 without losing a single wicket and with 4 overs remaining. Here's a taste of the action featuring some of the 10 sixes that were scored.
Terrific shot from Hales. It's gone for 6. It is. It's 6 more. Down the ground, launching for 6. It's huge. It's towards us. Bowling to Butler, who hammers into the leg side and for 6. 5 needed. Chamois on his way. Is there any bowls to Butler? It goes for the straight hit for 6. The fielder underneath it. Can't take it. And Jos Buttler, England's captain, has won this semi-final in the most emphatic fashion.
Speaking afterwards, England's captain Jos Buttler described the match as perfect.
Immensely proud of the guys. That was a brilliant performance, by far our best performance in the tournament. And, to do it on a day like today in such a high-pressure game is immensely satisfying. Obviously, to make it into a final is fantastic, and we'll be doing all we can to try and win the match.
Our cricket correspondent Jonathan Agnew was watching in Adelaide.
Only very seldom are there such emphatic international T20 wins as this, let alone in the pressure of a World Cup semi-final. England annihilated India, whose bowling and fielding fell into disarray under the onslaught wreaked by the bats of Hales and Butler. They hit 10 sixes between them, launching their attack from the first over, and ended with Butler smashing Chamois for 6 to finish the game with 4 overs remaining. Hales finished with 86 from 47 balls, and Butler 80 from 49. India's score depended almost entirely on Pandya, whose 63 came from just 33 balls. Kohli also made 50, but without threatening to take the game away from England, who now face Pakistan in Sunday's final.
Fresh strikes have been announced involving unions that represent tens of thousands of civil servants, teachers and train drivers. They are the latest in a series of walkouts over pay and conditions which have hit both the public and private sectors. Our employment correspondent Zoe Conway reports.
100,000 civil servants, such as driving test examiners, job centre staff and border force officials, along with thousands of teachers in Scotland, have now joined an ever-growing number of workers who have voted to strike. And the train drivers' union ASLEF has announced its members will walk out again on November the 26th, which will make it the 5th day they've taken such action this year. Today, the Health Secretary has met the head of the RCN Nursing Union, after it announced strikes yesterday. Nurses could walk out of as many as 100 NHS trusts, and that could happen before Christmas. In total, 1.6 million workers are either on strike or are considering voting to strike. Many are taking action because their pay isn't keeping up with inflation. This year, private sector pay has gone up by 6.2%, while public sector pay has risen by 2.2%. Yet inflation is now at more than 10% and could rise higher. If all these strikes go ahead, this could be the biggest industrial action the country has seen for decades.
The fast food company KFC has apologized to customers in Germany after sending out a promotional message urging people to commemorate Kristallnacht with cheesy chicken. In November 1938, at least 90 Jews were killed when Nazi mobs waged a night of terror, destroying homes, businesses, schools, and places of worship. The night became known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. With the details, here's Paul Moss.
It was wrong, it was insensitive, it was unacceptable. That was the verdict KFC gave itself after the outraged response to its latest promotion. The anniversary of Kristallnacht is a solemn occasion in Germany, the day the country remembers how the Nazis targeted Jewish properties and also commemorates the Holocaust itself. So Germans who have the KFC app on their mobile phone were surprised to see a Kristallnacht push notification. It suggested they mark the occasion by treating themselves to a soft cheese and crispy chicken. Just to add to the potential offence, Jewish dietary laws forbid mixing meat with dairy products, so chicken and cheese was about the most inappropriate meal KFC could have recommended. A company spokeswoman explained that it uses an automatic generator, which finds anniversaries and then creates content. A human being is apparently supposed to look over these, but somehow this time the notification was sent to phones without being checked. KFC promises it's now examining the company's processes to make sure it doesn't happen again.
In Afghanistan, the Taliban government has banned women from all parks in the capital, Kabul. One amusement park operator said the ban could force him to close, putting hundreds of jobs at risk. The rights and freedoms of women have been severely restricted since the Taliban seized power last year. Reporting from Kabul, our correspondent Yogita Limai.
The restrictions extend to amusement parks that usually have rides like bumper cars or a Ferris wheel, and where families visit together with their children. Women won't be allowed even if accompanied by male relatives. The Taliban claim Islamic laws were not being followed at parks, and that's why they've taken the decision. Right now, the announcement appears to be just for the capital, but it's been seen in the past that such rules are eventually applied across the country. This is yet another example of how women are being forced out of public life in Afghanistan since the Taliban took over.
A man has been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of a former girlfriend who died more than 20 years after he set her on fire. Stephen Craig, who's now 59, had already spent almost 19 years in jail for the attack on Jacqueline Kirk in Somerset in 1998. She was left badly disfigured and died of complications linked to the injuries she suffered. Jenny Kumar reports from Bristol Crown Court.
Stephen Craig poured petrol over Jacqueline Kirk and set fire to her in a car park in Weston-super-Mare. He's said to have been inspired by a scene in the film Reservoir Dogs. Miss Kirk died in 2019 from a ruptured diaphragm, caused in part by the injuries from the attack. But Craig was rearrested and charged with murder last year. A jury found him guilty last month. Passing sentence, the judge, Mrs. Justice Stacey, said he would serve at least 15 years in prison.
There is no doubt that you planned and intended to engage in a gratuitous, deliberate and monstrous attack on Jackie during that road trip, with whatever means at your disposal, and to intimidate her psychologically to cause maximum physical and mental pain over a period of days.
Jacqueline Kirk's daughter broke down in tears in court as she described the traumatic impacts of the crime and this second trial. She said, though, she was grateful for every day she had with her mother after the attack and glad she was able to see her get married and have children. Craig's conviction is thought to be a legal first because of the length of time between the attack and the victim's death.
The family of a British Egyptian activist who is on hunger strike in a jail near Cairo say they've been told he has undergone a medical intervention there. They fear this means Alaa Abdel Fattah has been force-fed. He's been in prison since last December, where he is serving a 5-year sentence for what the authorities called spreading false news. His lawyer has been denied access to him despite being given permission for a visit. Information gathered from the census last year shows that almost one adult in every 25 living in England and Wales was, at the time of the survey, a veteran of the UK's armed forces. It is the first time the question has ever been asked. The local authorities with the highest proportion of veterans include Gosport, North Kesteven and Richmondshire in England and Conway in Wales. The findings are intended to help direct essential services to veterans, as Mark Lobel reports.
The military covenant was enshrined in law more than a decade ago. It's a promise from the nation to members of the armed forces to ensure that their basic needs are met in areas such as housing, education and employment. Last year, for the first time, the census asked people if they had ever served in the armed forces, and 1,850,000 people over the age of 15 in England and Wales said they had. They make up 4.5% of the population in Wales. In England, the figure is 3.8%, with most concentrated in the north-east and south-west of the country. What surprised officials, including the government's principal advisor on statistics, Sir Ian Diamond, is not just the vast scale of the military alumni revealed for the first time, but where many of them choose to live.
Clearly, if you've been based somewhere for a while, so Gosport, where, of course, the Navy, very close to really large Navy bases, perhaps your family are there, you have children, and so it is perhaps not surprising that you will settle down there. But the extent of that has been, for us, a bit of a surprise.
From today, veterans and their families are able to give their feedback about their experiences of government services in a new survey online. The release of data on veterans' education and occupation history, as well as figures from Scotland, is expected within months.
In the city, the 100 share index ended the day up 79 points at 7,375. On Wall Street a short time ago, the Dow Jones was up 989 points at 33,503. The rise was a reaction to better than expected inflation figures of 7.7% for October, the lowest annual increase since January. On the currency markets, the pound is trading at $1.16.7, and against the euro, sterling is at €1.14.8. That makes a euro worth 87.1 pence. The Protestant Church in Germany is urging vicars and other staff to keep to a maximum speed of 60 miles per hour when they're driving on the motorway. The country's Autobahn famously have no upper limit. The church said driving at a lower speed would help combat climate change. Our correspondent Jenny Hill reports from Berlin.
You can drive as fast as you like on most German motorways, a freedom many here consider to be sacrosanct. But vicars hurrying between parish church services are now expected to stick to 60 miles an hour. At its annual synod, the country's Protestant church agreed to a new, albeit voluntary, speed limit for employees driving on church business. This was one of the more controversial items on the agenda. Many clerics apparently relish the call of the open road. But it reflects an ongoing national debate. The climate crisis has led to calls to impose a motorway speed limit. Some experts say that slowing down traffic would reduce emissions. Those behind the sacred speed limit said it was the church's mission to preserve creation. God may move in mysterious ways. His workers, it seems, must go more slowly.
The England football manager Gareth Southgate has included the Leicester City player James Maddison in his 26-man squad for the World Cup in Qatar. Maddison's only other appearance for England was 3 years ago when he played 35 minutes in a Euro qualifier. Southgate has also recalled Marcus Rashford after his return to form for Manchester United. It appears that the surging cost of living may have prompted some companies to take a more muted approach to television advertising this Christmas. John Lewis is the latest retailer to beam its festive message into our homes. It says its advert, featuring a foster family, is less about buying things and more about kindness. Our business correspondent Caroline Davis has been watching some of the season's biggest commercials.
Retailers have a difficult line to walk this Christmas. John Lewis has decided that this year it will be more muted.
We got a piece.
His advert follows a middle-aged man learning how to skateboard. You're okay?
Yeah.
Revealing at the end that it's to connect with his foster daughter when she arrives at Christmas.
Cool.
Not really sure, but I think
The tone was a deliberate choice, says Claire Poynton, Director of Customer at John Lewis.
It's really, really one that we've thought hard about. We did research and our customers said, you know, being mindful of the cost of living is really important. They're expecting brands to do a lot more, but they still want some joy.
In a far, far away land, a feast was being planned.
But after 2 years of Christmases disrupted by the pandemic, some retailers are pushing the boat out.
Perhaps thermidor crumpet. Delicious.
This is the Sainsbury's advert, set in a castle in the build-up to a banquet.
Well, that is a bit Christmassy.
And look at these.
And this is the Marks & Spencer's advert showing a table laden with festive food.
Caramelised onions.
Some analysts have warned retailers to be mindful about pressurising people to consume huge amounts to be happy this Christmas. Sophie Lewis is Chief Strategy Officer at the advertising agency M&C Saatchi.
This is the time when lots of retail organisations make the largest share of their profits. It has to be balanced with helping people and really being sensitive to the difficulties and situations in which people find themselves.
Other analysts point out that these adverts will have been planned and made months in advance, and that after several difficult years, some viewers would rather see a sprinkle of joy and magic at this time of year.
The headlines again. The head of Ukraine's armed forces has said his troops' attacks on Russian supply lines and command systems left Moscow with no choice but to leave the southern city of Kherson. The public inquiry into the Grenfell Tower fire has drawn to a close, with its senior barrister criticizing the companies and organizations involved in the maintenance of the tower block in West London. Train drivers at 12 operators are to stage a fresh strike later this month in their dispute about pay and conditions. And England's cricketers have produced one of their best ever performances to blow India away and reach the final of the T20 World Cup. BBC News.
And this evening's newsreader was Vigi Alice. Comedy next with Alexi Sale, but first returning to Radio 4 next week for its 78th series.
Last night a B-Day sprayed my wife.
Lulu.
Depeche Commode.
Jack D chairs Radio 4's antidote to panel games.
I'd like you please to suggest titles of bands likely to be playing at a pop festival for plumbers.
Oh, Danny boy, the pipes are clogging. With plenty more silly things to do for Milton Jones,
I predict to rise.
Joe Brand, Andy Hamilton and Jan Raven.
We've all enjoyed an aubergine blancmange.
I'm sorry, I haven't a clue.
Just checking, does everyone remember how to end the game?
Starting on Monday evening at 6:30 on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
Something to look forward to over the weekend. Now on Radio 4 with more uncompromising views. Alexi Sale's Imaginary Sandwich Bar opens for the final time this series.
There's a very 90s best-selling novel, acid pink cover and everything, published in 1996 called A White Merc with Fins, written by a guy called James Hawes. I read it when it came out, and at one point in A White Merc with Fins, the main character goes for a drink in a pub in central London. And in the pub he sees the comedian Alexi Sale. The character goes up to Alexi Sale and he says, "I'm your biggest fan, Alexi." And Alexi Sale says, "That doesn't mean we have a relationship." This has the air of authenticity. I don't remember it happening precisely, but that kind of snotty remark sounds exactly like something 1990s Alexi Sale would say. He was a bit of a bastard, 1990s Alexi Sale. In his unstructured Armani suit and designer stubble, hanging out at the Zanzibar Club with TV chef Anthony Worrell Thompson and the Backstreet Boys, playing with his Tamagotchi. A little while later, I heard that they were making a movie of A White Merc with Fins. So I wrote to the producers and I said, "Well, I am not the most versatile of actors. I feel the part of Alexi Sale is one I could play with conviction." The producers finally wrote back and said 1990s Alexi Sale had been written out of the script. We shouldn't judge him too harshly, though, 1990s Alexei Sayle. He was an angry and bitter man who was beginning to comprehend that audiences were slowly realising that they could go for a nice night out to see a comedian, and it didn't necessarily need to involve being screamed at by a fat Marxist in a tight suit. He could come home feeling warm and reassured rather than upset and impotent. For a decade, he had bestrode the light entertainment landscape like a very colossus. Now he was being replaced by younger, apolitical performers, rolling back his strict and inflexible rules on what you were or weren't allowed to laugh at. He was lost. In any entertainer's career, there are peaks and troughs. Sometimes you're in fashion, sometimes you are not. So in what I think of as my wilderness years, I turned my back on stand-up comedy for nearly 2 decades, and viewing myself as a serious author, instead became involved for a while, touring tiny arts venues in remote parts of the country. The first half of the 90-minute show I performed was a reading from my published short stories and novels, and the second half was me holding a question and answer session with the audience. The 3 weirdest questions I can remember being asked came one after the other in a tiny arts centre in Gloucester. They were, should ginger people be allowed jobs? Have you ever been in a mental institution and what was the food like? And have you ever thought of selling magazines from a handcart in the high street? Sometimes the questions could be good, though. I was launching my latest volume of memoir in 2016 at the Liverpool Philharmonic Hall, and in the Q&A, a bloke put his hand up, and I thought he was going to, ask me about, the influence of Thomas Hardy on my prose style. But instead he said, what's the latest you've ever stayed up? I was stumped for an answer, so I said to him, I don't know, what's the latest you've ever stayed up? And he said, Wednesday. I varied the book reading show with appearances at literary festivals in small market towns, where I would be interviewed on stage about my career by an embittered local author who couldn't wait to ask me on stage, why did your publishers, Bloomsbury, reject my sex robot detective novel set in space? The tiny arts centre circuit was a sad one. Retired cricketers talking about their recovery from alcoholism. Michael Portillo talking about where he buys his pink trousers. And disgraced former Emmerdale stars reading their slam poetry. At the venue, the sound technician would always ask what music you wanted played before the show. Understandably, most performers pick something jaunty to try and get the audience in a happy mood. But one night, for some reason, in a former corn exchange in Cirencester, or maybe it was an ex-bike shed in a village 6 miles outside Harrogate, I can't remember, I chose this. It's called Jesus' Blood Never Failed Me. Originally appearing in 1971, it is a 74-minute-long track by avant-garde musician Gavin Bryars, based on an endlessly repeated loop of an unknown homeless man singing a brief improvised stanza. The audience were forced to listen to about 25 minutes of this before I came on. I never got that audience back. That was the most miserable show I have ever done. But that track got me thinking about repetition. Repetition which is often employed in our culture. Through something being repeated, you get to appreciate different facets of that thing, aspects that weren't apparent the first time around, attributes that weren't visible on the first encounter. Monet did 250 paintings of the same water lilies in his pond. In the Cabaret Voltaire, the birthplace of Dadaism, performers would repeatedly tell the same joke, simultaneously in a variety of different languages. And Boris Johnson told the same lie over and over again. Get Brexit done, oven-ready deal, levelling up, and I'm not a compulsive shagger with a drug problem. Oh, here we are at my imaginary sandwich bar.
Behold my sandwich bar, that's at bargain prices, where all you cheats and thieves and liars come for rolls and custard slices, 'cause humanity is cant and vanity, but underneath it all a man's a man which does enjoy his daily sandwich.
Hello everybody, I'm Alexis L and welcome to my imaginary sandwich bar. Over here is the pretend counter, behind me is the illusory coffee machine, and in front of me the non-existent customers. Here's one of them now. Hello mate, what can I do for you?
Nice sandwich bar you've got here!
Well, thank you.
Be ashamed if anything happened to it!
Hey, how do you mean?
I mean, there could be a fire, or problems with the broadband, or the windows could get broken. But if you paid a small fee, we'd make sure that sort of thing didn't happen!
I see, what sort of fee? Yeah, all right, there you go.
Cheers, Alexi! See you next Tuesday! Stay safe!
That was playwright and memoirist Alan Bennett. So to return to the idea of repetition, Keir Starmer may be doing better in the polls right now, but I am reminded of how in 19th century Spain they had this thing with their governments called El Turno, the turn. There were two identical parties. There was the Conservative Democratic Liberals and the Liberal Conservative Democrats. And they just used to take turns ruling Spain. One party would govern for a bit, loot the country, ensure the wealthy stayed wealthy, and then hand over to the other party who'd do the same. So I'd like you to note the use of repetition in this piece of slam poetry, which I'll be touring around half-full art centres in the spring, entitled I Hate Keir Starmer. I hate Keir Starmer. I hate him aesthetically. I hate his fussy little, too perfect, just shy of Nazi officer haircut. I hate his Prime Minister from Central casting face, which initially seemed designed by committee, but increasingly suffers from having an expression slapped on it like he's desperately trying to explain away his role in a sex scandal at the dog pound he runs. I hate his pedantic voice, which makes everything he says sound like an HR meeting you didn't really need to be at. Starmer is a small man, physically short, yes, but that's not really notable, except as a symbol of the immense spiritual shortness that it signifies. I hate Keir Starmer. I hate him ethically. I hate the way that Starmer poses as an honest man, then casually breaks every pledge he made to the Labour membership before they elected him as leader. I hate that he's a liar, and he's not even good at it. Plainly, what he is good at is being a coward. I hate Keir Starmer because what we all need is the possibility of actually doing something, concrete action that might actually make the world a better place, and Keir Starmer is a fat big block in this possibility. I hate Keir Starmer like a malfunctioning bus stop sign that keeps telling me my bus is about to show up, but it never does. I hate Keir Starmer because he has been imposed on me, whether I like it or not, and he will not go away. The only time he looked like winning an election was when he was up against Liz Truss. A blustering idiot who seems to have gotten lost on the way to filming a series of The Apprentice. Accidentally ended up being appointed Prime Minister. Even if Starmer was replaced, one suspects his wing of the Labour Party would conspire to put Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting in charge instead. Someone who looks like Starmer's son, who he made out of margarine. I hate Keir Starmer. But I don't want to hate Keir Starmer. What we need, is a world in which nobody hates him, because nobody has to think about him at all. You know, it's been really hard getting this series written. And comedians are forced into various strategies to generate new material. Some turn up unannounced at comedy clubs with half an idea, which by the time they get on live from the Apollo is 3/4 of an idea. Others do work-in-progress shows, while old-school comics like Ken Dodd would simply buy jokes from gag writers. When Ken Dodd died, we all moved up one. And so now, as the oldest working Scouse comedian, I am in charge. Southport's Lee Mack, St. Helens Johnny Vegas all have to bow down before me. John Bishop has to go and get my dry cleaning. Ken Dodd was accused of tax evasion. His response was, "They call it the Inland Revenue, but I live by the sea." Laughs off your material, Doddy! You buck-toothed old Tory! That's another way to get stand-up material. The hunt for new material can lead you to some pretty dark places. Many years ago, at the start of my career, I turned up at the original Comedy Store one night with this new piece of comedy I'd come up with, which was a quiz where if the audience didn't get the questions right, I pointed a gun at them and threatened to shoot them. I'd bought the gun from Linda's Littlewoods catalogue. If you don't remember, Littlewoods catalogue was like the Amazon website, but made out of dead trees. The gun was actually an air pistol, but in appearance it was a pretty convincing imitation of a model 1911 Colt 45 caliber military sidearm. Now, here's a tip for up-and-coming young comics. Don't point a gun at the audience. It makes them nervous. At first, the audience at the Comedy Store were just indifferent to my opener, but when I started screaming and pointing a very real-looking gun at them, they became extremely agitated and understandably started yelling for me to get off. The MC let me carry on, but despite that, I died a terrible death. After I came off stage, I also learned that there was a journalist in the crowd from the Observer newspaper who was doing the first big feature ever on the Comedy Store in a national newspaper. And just to make things worse, for me, this was the first night that Rick Mayall and Adrian Edmondson appeared. In my unhappiness, I regarded the student pair with contempt and desperately wished for them to fail. Yet, once they began to perform, my pain got even deeper, because they were fantastic, with a crazy energy that made them the undoubted hit of the night, especially compared with the sweaty, unfunny guy with the gun who'd been on before. It made my failure all the more painful. I wobbled back to our council flat on my bike, and when I got home, I fell into deep despair, thinking that my career was ruined almost before it had begun. It turned out, though, that it wasn't my fault. It was the guns. Maybe because it had developed a small fault and I'd refused to pay Littlewoods the balance of what was owed on it, the gun may have collected some bad karma. Once I got to know them better, I lent the gun to Rick and Aid for a sketch they wanted to do with them as terrorists holding the entire audience hostage. And like my quiz bit, that sketch went down really badly. Then later on, the gun was stolen from the horrible council flat in Kennington, which they shared, and was subsequently used to hold up a post office. The robber of the post office was shot and wounded by armed police. So it was a very unlucky gun. You didn't need much new material if you were emceeing rock festivals. You just used what was happening around you. I emceed the Pyramid Stage at Glastonbury 4 times in the 80s. For instance, on the second occasion in 1985, a famously muddy year, I announced from the stage, "Somebody's lost a contact lens." You should all just have a look for it. For my third appearance, I drove down to Worthy Farm with Linda in my jet black 1970 Rover 3.5-litre P5B Coupe. One of the questions philosophy asks is, can a person truly lie to themselves? By owning a 15-year-old classic car, I think I managed to do just that. Everybody thought from what I told them that by possessing this sleek, powerful, chromed, rare, historic machine, I was making myself truly happy. Whereas, in fact, every day, minute and second it was in my possession, that car made me utterly and profoundly miserable, because it kept breaking down. The RAC man would say when I called him out, "Oh, great cars these, really reliable." And I'd think, if it's so bleeding reliable, how come I know the names of all your grandchildren? And you're thinking of going to Portugal for your holidays this year. So as we pulled into a service station on the M4, the Rover developed a brand new fault. The pressure gauge dropped like a stone, and I found if the speed dropped below 16 miles an hour, the engine would just die. After about 20 minutes, the car started again. But arriving at the vehicle entrance to the main stage at Glastonbury, it conked out once more, and I only got through the gates propelled by a number of emaciated Hawkwind fans. This time, it wouldn't fire up again for nearly 40 minutes, so I spent the whole day worrying about how I was going to get home. Finally, about 8, after introducing the last act, Elvis Costello playing solo, and as the prescient first bars of "Accidents Will Happen" echoed behind me, I called for the gates to be swung open, and engine revving, I headed for the road back to London. When I had driven into the backstage area on that sunny morning, there had been a rough track which led to the lane that took you out of Worthy Farm. But as the day had worn on, many festival goers had now erected tents, food stalls, children's playgrounds, yurts and TVs across it. With headlights on high beam and my foot pressed to the floor, I was forced to swerve from side to side, trying not to let the speed drop. What the crowd saw was Alexei Sale, the people's comedian, hurtling over the sacred fields of Glastonbury in a huge black car, horn blaring, massive V8 engine screaming. Many did not realise what was happening at first. "Hey, Alexei, man," they would call out, "I'm a really big fan of you." Then there'd be a thump as the coupe sideswiped them. "Can't let the speed drop. Problems with engine pressure," I would shout back. But pretty soon, an angry mob brandishing burning torches was pursuing my car, and it became even more vital that I didn't stop, as I now risked being torn apart by furious vegans. Finally, we reached the lane, and performing a handbrake turn, I managed to take the corner, and we headed back to London with no further trouble, except that I was picking scraps of denim and cheesecloth out of the Rover's radiator for days to come. Aging can be a real barrier to coming up with new material, because it's really important not to get set in your ways. When I was 60, I got my old person's free bus pass, and I took to riding the bus, something I hadn't done for years. One difference is now they've got that screen with the pictures from all the different CCTV cameras at the front, which is like a really boring in-flight movie. Though I find it often features a fat, baldy guy. And I really like his performance. Another thing that is different on the bus these days is all the people talking on their phones using earbuds. And because you can't see the earbuds, it just looks like they're sitting by themselves shouting. Now, in the 1960s and 1970s, when I used to ride the bus, somebody sitting alone shouting meant they were really frightening and potentially dangerous. I wonder if all those old school bus shouters are completely pissed off and they're going like, "Oh, the business has completely changed, man." I mean, back in the day, if you wanted to shout on the bus, you really needed to